This is Group 2's ethical analysis of the NSPE Code of Ethics. For this project, we will be talking about how utilitarianism, Kantianism, and virtue ethics see the following canons. Following canons are: engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties shall, number 1, hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Number 2, perform services only in areas of their competence. Number 3, issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. Number 4, act for each employer or client as a faithful agent or trustee. Number 5, avoid deceptive acts. And number 6, conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully so as to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession.
All right. So how does the first fundamental canon of ethics relate to utilitarianism? Well, what is the first fundamental canon of ethics? It states hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Awesome. So what exactly is utilitarianism ethics? Utilitarian ethics is the idea that moral truth is whatever benefits the majority. And it also focuses on consequences of action. So all in all, I would say that utilitarianism ethics would agree with this canon because if you look at the definition, holding paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, if you were to follow that, it would benefit the majority. So that would be moral truth, because making the canon true. Also, focusing on consequences of action, well, if you were to not follow the first fundamental canon of ethics, according to utilitarianism, that would be wrong. So that was why it follows the first fundamental canon.
For this canon, in the view of Kantianism, it would agree with the statement because of the formula of humanity, which respects others and your environment, and upholding the safety and health and the welfare of the public does respect others and your environment. Also, it does hold a form of duty. You have a duty to inform a higher up or somebody in more power than you if something in the project will endanger the welfare of the public.
We believe that virtue ethics does agree with the first fundamental canon. This is because for three main reasons. The first main canon allows people to show respect for others. Respect is a great virtue. By putting the public's interest before one's self-interest, it also keeps someone from being greedy in case their greed could in fact produce things that could harm the public. It also shows a love for one's fellow man. It means that you're able to understand others around you, also showing respect for knowledge and knowledge of your fellow people. And finally, wisdom and justice. It makes sure you know what's best for the public, and it helps keep everyone equal and everyone on fair, healthy, safe ground.
Utilitarianism disagrees with the second fundamental canon. Utilitarianism disagrees that engineers should only function in areas of their competence. For example, a group of engineers without borders may not be competent enough to build a well for a village in a third world country. However, since we want to maximize happiness within utilitarianism, and building this well will make the village people happy, the Engineers Without Borders group should build the well no matter if it only works for 6 months or 6 years. Because the ends justify the means, and we want to maximize happiness, utilitarianism states that they should continue to build the well and bring happiness to the village people.
So the second fundamental canon in the eyes of Kantianism Kantianism would agree with this canon. The purpose of this canon is to protect the public, the individual engineer, and the team on a project from harm. Kant would say that acting within your area of competence, because it would protect others and yourself, it would be the best way of treating everyone with an underlying principle of respect. In this picture here, we can see, I don't know, obviously, like what this person's role is on this construction site, but obviously he's doing something that's pretty stupid. He's pretty high up on a ladder, and it's not really positioned well. This might be someone acting out of their area of competence, say per se, like he was supposed to work on the ground floor, but he snuck up to the top floor and started working there. And this would be an example of somebody endangering themselves and others, breaking both Kantianism's rules of ethics and the second fundamental canon rule.
Virtue ethics also supports the second fundamental canon. This is mainly for three main reasons. First of all, the second fundamental canon supports the virtue of wisdom. It helps encourage people to become extremely wise in specific topics so they can flourish in those and very thoroughly understand them. It also discourages individuals from acting foolishly, trying to perform duties they don't entirely understand, which could endanger others. Second of all, it promotes honesty. It makes people not lie about their competence, both for work reasons and encouraging them to not lie in general. And third of all, it promotes humility, mainly by allowing people to admit that they don't know everything and they might not be the best suited for the job at hand if they are not the most competent in dealing with it.
Through the lens of utilitarianism, the third fundamental canon in the NSPE Code of Ethics would not necessarily be seen as the best or moral thing to do. This is because the action of engineers issuing public statements only in a truthful and objective manner does not consider the consequences of the action. There is mostly focus on intent, and through the eyes of a utilitarian, intent or motive does not really matter. However, through the lens of rule utilitarianism, it is plausible that one would think that adopting this third canon could maximize utility, so engineers maybe should follow this rule by being truthful in their reports. It is difficult to say whether this rule is moral or not under utilitarianism because there is no known outcome. A utilitarian take on this rule would be to issue reports that maximize pleasure for the public and fellow engineers. However, clearly this is not realistic. It could cause a lot of problems in the field, including dishonest reports, to hide alarming evidence, and other similar circumstances.
The third fundamental canon is actually pretty closely related to one of Kant's maxims, which is to never lie. So the NSPE Code of Ethics kind of elaborates on the third fundamental canon by saying that engineers shall be objective and truthful in professional reports and include all relevant and pertinent information. And furthermore, states that if you're inspired by or paid for comments that you're going to make, then you should always disclose this conflict of interest. The third fundamental canon and the additional rules that the NSPE Code of Ethics lays out are really stating like a very similar maxim to the Kant's "do not lie" maxim, and the NSPE Code of Ethics is saying that in professional reports you should always be objective and truthful and never withhold information. So this sort of like moral duty to always follow this maxim is like very reminiscent of Kantian ethics. So I think that the third fundamental canon is very much supported by Kantian.
So as we've said, the third fundamental canon states that one should issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. According to virtue ethics, it would be right to only say these things in an objective and truthful manner because this is what a virtuous person would do. Someone with a good character wouldn't unnecessarily lie about things, and they would do their best to be objective about it. So the virtues included are honesty and objectivity, which line up with virtue ethics. On the other side of this, the canon goes against people acting in a dishonest and biased way with others, which is also something that virtue ethics goes against because these vices would be dishonesty and bias.
Utilitarians would mostly agree with this fourth canon because acting as a faithful and trustworthy agent will mostly guarantee consequences that maximize pleasure for the public and other engineers. This canon follows consequentialism because by deciding how to act, engineers consider the actions that result in trustworthy work. Additionally, engineers should not take bribes or financial compensation from outside parties for their work because it does not maximize pleasure for the majority. This work would be seen as untrustworthy by the public, therefore creating a net displeasure for clients and employers as well. With equal consideration of interests, engineers should not view their pleasure as more important than their employers and clients. When following ACT utilitarianism, engineers should use this canon as a way to perform the action that maximizes well-being through the lens of utilitarianism.
All right. The fourth canon being to act for each employer or client as a faithful agent or trustee. According to Kantians, I believe most of them would agree with this canon. As far as the universal law of nature, the first formula, a world where people would act in good faith of their contracts is probably more ideal to a Kantian because people collecting payments and not doing work wouldn't allow society to function for the most part. Nobody doing work well would mean, well, if you're working for someone else, for your employer, for a client, means that nobody can get good help to make anything actually happen. And as far as the second formula, humanity, the end itself, respecting clients and employers as ends in themselves is in line with Kantianism. Using people for mere means would be not honoring contracts, collecting payments anyway, or doing work that won't stand up to the demands that a client would actually need it for, or an employer would actually have that work put to the test for.
The important part of this canon with virtue ethics is that it specifically points out that people should be acting as faithful agents or trustees for their employer or client. With virtue ethics, this lines up very directly because someone who had a good character would be trustworthy and would be able to faithfully help those around them that they're working with or working under. Aristotle would stand behind this with the virtues of trustworthiness and faithfulness. And this canon, as well as virtue ethics, go against someone acting in an untrustworthy way or being an unreliable person.
A utilitarian would neither disagree or agree with the fifth fundamental canon. According to the NSPE Code of Ethics, acting deceptively includes lying about one's qualifications or partaking in bribery. If being deceitful results in an outcome that promotes more happiness or maximizes pleasure for a large amount of people, then the utilitarian would support performing deceptive acts. The consequences of lying may be positive depending on the scenario. For example, if an engineer lied about having a license or the qualifications to sell a product that would help cure cancer, but was still able to develop a working product that people were using to save lives, then the consequences of their actions would be maximizing happiness, and therefore the deceptive act would not be immoral.
And the fifth canon, avoid deceptive acts. It's pretty on the nose for how Kantianism would address it. The quote from Kant, "By a lie, man throws away, and as it were annihilates his dignity as a man." Annihilating your dignity, not a good thing. He's probably not for deceiving people. This canon does satisfy the first formula of universal law of nature. If everybody was trying to deceive one another, nobody would be able to deceive anybody. So it is self-defeating. And it does satisfy the second formula because it respects the personhood of all stakeholders related to engineering work. If you weren't respecting the personhood of clients, employers, stakeholders, anyone would be, my gain or convenience takes priority over your personhood or your ability to make informed consent.
The fifth fundamental canon is avoid deceptive acts, and according to the virtue ethics philosophy, it would agree with this statement because virtuous people are honest and trustworthy, and if you are not avoiding deceptive acts, then that wouldn't be honest nor trustworthy. And the vices include like dishonesty and deceptive acts. So if you were to like be creating or doing deceptive acts, then that would lead more towards vices, and vices is what virtue ethics is trying to avoid. So therefore, again, virtue ethics would agree with this canon.
If acting honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully creates the maximum amount of happiness, then it would fit the utilitarian perspective. Although if there is a scenario in which an engineer did not act lawfully, which is one of the guidelines of the sixth canon, but the outcome of their work created greater amounts of happiness, then utilitarianism would not agree with the sixth canon. There are also possible scenarios in which an engineer followed the NSPE Code of Ethics, but maybe their product or solution was used for the wrong purpose, it would result in a greater amount of displeasure. Overall, because the morality of the action depends on the consequences, according to utilitarianism, then acting in a way that follows these guidelines does not ensure their morality.
The sixth fundamental canon in the NSPE Code of Ethics says that you should act in a certain way in order to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the engineering profession. So while there's definitely something here that's like related to the Kantian idea of universalizability, in that if every engineer acted in an honorable and responsible way, then it would reflect positively on the entirety of the profession and would have it would be a good way for everyone to act. Although that does like appeal to this Kantian idea, I don't feel that that this is really laying out a specific maxim that should always be followed, that Kantianism kind of requires.
Virtue ethics would agree with the seventh fundamental canon. The definition of virtue ethics addresses the characterization of an individual and how the moral decisions that the individual makes is based upon the character of an individual. The biggest difference between virtue ethics is that virtue ethics addresses the honor and reputation of an individual engineer compared to the seventh fundamental canon, which addresses the honor and reputation of the engineering profession as a whole. Basically, the seventh fundamental canon just expands virtue ethics to the broader perspective of the engineering profession compared to one individual profession.
All right. In conclusion, in this presentation, we analyzed the three moral views being utilitarianism, Kantianism, and virtue ethics with respect to the sixth Code of Ethics as stated by the National Society of Professional Engineers. Now, of the three moral views, the worst one that aligned with the Code of Ethics was utilitarianism. It aligned with about 3 of the 6 moral views. And then would be Kantianism. It only aligned, or not only, it aligned with about 5 of the 6 moral views. So it still aligned pretty well, but not amazing. And then virtue ethics aligned the most with the Code of Ethics. So we can conclude from our presentation that virtue ethics is what should be practiced in the professional career for engineers as stated by the National Society of Professional Engineers because it aligned most with the Code of Ethics. Thanks.